The kid slammed the bounty dossier on my table hard enough to rattle my drink, and I almost killed him for it. I did not kill him. I want that noted, because 3 years ago, I would have opened his throat before his hand left the table, and no one in that guild hall would have blinked. That is who I was. That is who I still am, on most days, when the scar does not ache and the memories stay where I put them. My name is Vratek Sonkai. I am Dravari, 8 feet of scaled muscle, venom spines along both forearms, infrared thermal vision that lets me see a heartbeat through a concrete wall. For 26 years I have been a licensed mercenary, operating under the Corvan Compact, and for the last 14 of those years, I have held the singular distinction of being the most feared contract hunter in the Orion Perseus arm. 412 confirmed kills across 60 species. I have hunted Krailvoss hive queens in their spawning chambers. I have tracked Shantari psychics who could boil blood with a thought. I killed a Dominion war priest in single combat, on live broadcast, and the footage still circulates in training academies as an example of perfect execution. I say none of this to impress you. I say it so you understand what it means when I tell you that there is one species in this galaxy I will not hunt. Not for any price, not for any reason, not ever. The kid who slammed the dossier was a Velthari, young, maybe 6 years into his career. He had 3 friends with him, all of them armed, all of them wearing that particular expression I have seen on 1,000 young hunters who think they are invincible because nothing has hurt them yet. Behind them, the guild hall hummed with its usual evening noise, Mercus drinking, swapping contracts, arguing over kill counts. The air smelled like engine coolant and cheap stimulants. I looked at the dossier without opening it. I already knew what it was. Word travels fast on Corvan Station, and this contract had been floating around for 2 days, rejected by every senior hunter on the board. 3 human colonists had escaped an illegal mineral extraction operation in the Helix Expanse. The mining consortium wanted them retrieved before they could reach a communications relay and report the operation to the Terran Colonial Authority. The payout was obscene, enough credits to buy a warship, and nobody would touch it. The kid leaned forward. His name was Dren, and he had that particular brand of confidence that comes from killing things that cannot fight back. He told me his crew needed a lead hunter, someone with experience. He said the targets were just humans, soft, breakable, no natural weapons, no armor plating, no biological defenses worth mentioning. He said it would be easy money. I pushed the dossier back across the table and picked up my drink. I do not hunt humans. The silence at the table lasted about 3 seconds before one of his crew laughed. A female Gorvathi, big, four-armed, the kind of heavy muscle you bring when you want to break down doors. She said something about the great Vratek Sonkai losing his nerve. The word she used was closer to coward, but the translator smoothed it. I set my drink down and looked at her. I did not say anything. I just looked. She stopped laughing. Then I did something I have never done for anyone. I reached up and unlatched the chest plate on my left side, the one I keep sealed at all times, the one my armorer reinforced with triple-layered composite after what happened. I pulled the plate aside and showed them what was underneath. The scar runs from the base of my rib line to the ventral seam below my primary heart. It is wide and ugly and healed wrong, because field surgery with plant fiber thread does not produce clean results. The synthetic mesh holding the tissue together is visible through the scales, a web of silver filament that pulses faintly when my heart beats too fast. A medical team on Corvan offered to repair it 7 times. I refused every time. I keep this scar the way humans keep monuments. As a reminder, as a warning. A human did this to me, with a sharpened piece of hull scrap, while bleeding from 3 wounds that should have killed her 20 minutes earlier. The table went very quiet. I sealed my armor and ordered another drink. Then I told them I would explain exactly 1 time why this rule exists. Not because I owed them anything, not because I was feeling generous, because if they took that contract, they would die. And dead mercenaries are bad for guild reputation. Worse, they would die confused, unable to understand what killed them or why, and confusion is the most pathetic way to end. 12 years ago, I was at the peak of my career, undefeated, unmatched. I had never failed a contract, never taken a wound that kept me down longer than a day, never encountered a species that made me hesitate. I was not arrogant. I was accurate. Every assessment I made of a target was based on data, biology, tactical analysis, and verified intelligence. I did not guess. I calculated. And my calculations were always correct. Then a client named Dovir Len contacted me through a private channel. Len was Chelzari, a biotrader who operated in the gray zones between legal commerce and outright piracy. He had money, connections, and a problem. A small human survey team, 6 members, had been conducting research on an uncharted jungle world in the Verith system. During their survey, they had discovered something valuable. Len would not tell me what, and I did not care. What mattered was that the humans refused to hand it over. Len wanted them removed, and he was willing to pay more than my last 20 contracts combined. I accepted without hesitation. I pulled the standard intelligence brief on humans. Tier 4 species in the Galactic Classification Index. Mid-range intelligence, comparable to Feldrathi or lower Chelzari. Fragile biology, thin dermal layer, no subdermal armor, no venom glands, no redundant organ systems. Endoskeletal structure, meaning their bones were inside their bodies where they could not serve as natural weapons. Average lifespan around 80 standard years, which is laughable by galactic standards. They could not see infrared, could not echolocate, could not regenerate lost limbs. Their primary sensory advantage was binocular vision with moderate color spectrum, and their physical advantage was bipedal endurance locomotion, which the brief noted was unusual but tactically insignificant. I remember reading that line, tactically insignificant. I remember thinking it sounded right. I assembled a kill team, 5 hunters, each the best in their discipline. Korath, a Feldrathi tracker whose sonar could detect a heartbeat through 20 meters of solid rock. Garvan, a Gorvan heavy, 4 arms, each one stronger than a hydraulic press, capable of tearing through bulkhead plating with his bare hands. Twins named Selith and Vaya, Yasiri infiltrators, chameleon-skinned, capable of bending light around their bodies to become functionally invisible, and myself, leading. We shipped out on my personal vessel, a fast attack corvette with full sensor suite and orbital bombardment capability. I always bring more firepower than I need. That is not paranoia. That is professionalism. The planet was designated Verith 9. Dense jungle biosphere, toxic flora, bioluminescent fungal networks, aggressive insect analogs, and an atmosphere that sat right on the edge of breathable for most galactic species. A miserable world. The kind of place that exists to make you uncomfortable, and then kill you for complaining about it. The human team had been living there for 4 months, which I noted as mildly impressive, but ultimately irrelevant. Stubbornness is not the same as capability. Orbital scans confirmed 6 human heat signatures clustered in a small prefabricated research shelter on the jungle floor. Lightly armed, no military hardware, no defensive perimeter, no satellite uplink. 6 scientists in a tin box on a hostile world, and I was bringing 5 of the deadliest hunters in the sector to collect them. I told my team we would be off-world by sunrise. Korath ran the final scan as we prepped for deployment. 6 signatures, 4 stationary, 2 moving slowly inside the shelter. No external activity, no sentries, no patrol patterns. The humans were sleeping. They did not know we were here. I loaded my weapons, sealed my armor, and stepped onto the drop shuttle. Garvan took the seat across from me, his 4 arms crossed, his tusked jaw set in that flat expression Gorvan wear when they are bored. Selith and Vaya flickered in and out of visibility, testing their camouflage. Korath sat in the back with his eyes closed, his sonar organs pulsing faintly as he mapped the terrain below us. This was routine. This was a standard extraction against an undefended target on a primitive world. The payout was extraordinary, but the job was simple. I had done this 100 times. As the shuttle descended through the atmosphere, I remember looking out the viewport at the jungle canopy below. It stretched from horizon to horizon, a dark and tangled ocean of alien growth, broken only by the occasional clearing where something large had fallen and torn a gap in the green. Somewhere down there, 6 humans were sleeping in their shelter, unaware that 5 apex predators were falling toward them from orbit. I felt nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, no concern. This was work. Clean, professional, unremarkable work. That was the last time I ever underestimated anything. We hit the ground 2 kilometers from the human camp under full darkness, masked from every sensor type I knew existed. Standard protocol. The shuttle touched down in a natural clearing, and we moved into the jungle single file. Korath on point with his sonar painting the terrain ahead. Selith and Vaya, invisible on the flanks. Garvin behind me as rear guard. The jungle at night was a living thing. Every surface pulsed with bioluminescent growth, casting the undergrowth in shifting patterns of blue and green that played tricks with depth perception. The air was thick and hot, heavy with chemical compounds that made my scales itch and my venom glands tingle. Insect analogues the size of my fist buzzed through the canopy, trailing phosphorescent streaks behind them like slow-burning embers. The ground was soft, layered with decomposing plant matter that absorbed our footsteps and released faint clouds of spore dust with every impact. I had operated in hostile biospheres before. Acid swamps on Gorvon Prime, frozen methane deserts on the Yasiri moons, a fungal hellscape on Drevor 7 where the air itself was a digestive enzyme. Varath 9 was unpleasant, but it was not the worst I had seen. What I noticed, though, was that the jungle felt aware. Not sentient, not intelligent, but reactive, like a nervous system made of roots and fungal threads, responding to our presence with subtle shifts in bioluminescent output and insect behavior. The organisms around us were changing their patterns as we moved through them, dimming in some areas and brightening in others, as if the forest was tracking our progress. I filed this observation and moved on. The jungle's behavior was irrelevant to the mission. We were not here to study the ecosystem. We were here to collect 6 soft targets and go home. Korath led us through the densest growth, choosing paths that provided cover and avoided open ground. His sonar was painting everything within a 50-meter radius, mapping roots, branches, rock formations, and the heat signatures of native fauna. Nothing unusual, no sapient life, no traps, no ambush points, just jungle, thick and dark and buzzing. We covered the first kilometer in 20 minutes, fast, silent, efficient. My thermal vision was scanning constantly, looking for any heat signature that did not match the ambient biology. Nothing. The jungle was empty of sapient life in every direction. At the 1-kilometer mark, Korath stopped. He held up one clawed hand, the signal for caution, and his sonar organs flared wide. I moved up beside him and waited. "Something is wrong with the acoustics," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but Feldrathi whispers carry a subsonic harmonic that cuts through ambient noise like a blade. He said the sonar return around the camp was distorted, scattered, like something was interfering with the sound waves, breaking up the echo pattern and feeding back noise instead of clean data. He could see the camp, but the edges were blurred. Shapes that should have been crisp were melting into the background. I asked what could cause that. He said he did not know. Geological anomaly, maybe. Mineral deposits that fragmented acoustic signals. It happened sometimes on worlds with unusual subsurface composition. Certain crystal structures could scatter sonar the way a prism splits light. I accepted that explanation because it was logical, and because nothing in the intelligence brief suggested the humans had any technology capable of disrupting Feldrathi sonar. They were scientists with basic equipment, survey tools, sample containers, a portable lab unit. They could not possibly know how sonar worked at a biological level, let alone how to counter it. I was already wrong, and I did not know it yet. We pushed forward. The second kilometer took longer because the jungle thickened into a wall of interlocking growth that forced us to cut through in places. Garvin used his upper arms to bend aside trunks the width of my torso, while his lower arms kept his weapon ready. The wood groaned and cracked under his grip, sending showers of bioluminescent spores cascading down around us. Selith and Vaya were somewhere on our flanks, invisible, their positions tracked only by the faint bioelectric pings their suits emitted on our tactical frequency. We reached the camp perimeter at 43 minutes after landing, right on schedule. The shelter was exactly where the orbital scan placed it, a standard human prefabricated unit, modular, roughly 8 meters by 4, sitting in a small clearing where the jungle had been cut back. I could see it through the undergrowth, a dull metallic rectangle covered in condensation, its surface reflecting the bioluminescent glow of the surrounding fungal networks. A small solar array sat on the roof, tilted to catch whatever light filtered through the canopy during daylight hours. A few storage containers were stacked beside the entrance. Two folding chairs sat near a circle of scorched earth where someone had built a fire at some point. Small details, normal details. The kind of camp a team of 6 researchers would build on a long-term survey mission. My thermal vision showed 6 heat signatures inside. 4 clustered in the rear section, consistent with sleeping positions. 2 in the forward section, moving slowly, consistent with people going about routine tasks. A pot of something warm sat near one of the moving signatures, probably a late-night drink. Everything about the scene was mundane, unremarkable. Exactly what I expected. I gave the breach signal, a single pulse on the tactical frequency. Seleth and Vaya moved first, invisible, flowing through the undergrowth like ghosts. Their job was to enter the shelter through any available opening, neutralize the 2 active humans quietly, and hold position until the main team breached the front entrance. Standard entry protocol. They had done it dozens of times on dozens of worlds, and no target had ever detected them before they struck. 30 seconds passed, no signal. I waited. Korath was beside me, his sonar focused on the shelter, trying to resolve the interior through the acoustic distortion he had noted earlier. Garvin was behind us, his 4 arms gripping a heavy pulse cannon that could cut through the shelter wall like wet cloth. Every member of the team was in position. Every angle was covered. 60 seconds. Nothing. I sent a ping on the tactical channel. A simple query, requesting status. No response from either Yassiri. The channel was open. Their equipment was functioning. They simply were not answering. That was the first moment I felt something I had not felt in over a decade. Not fear. Not yet. Something smaller. A pebble of doubt, rolling around the base of my skull, too small to name but too present to ignore. I sent Korath forward. He moved low and fast, his compact frame slipping through the undergrowth with the fluid grace of a born predator. His sonar was painting the shelter interior, mapping every surface, every object, every heat signature. He reached the tree line at the edge of the clearing and stopped. 30 more seconds of silence. Then I heard it. A sound that did not belong to any weapon or alarm system in any database I had ever accessed. A small, precise mechanical click. The sound of something engaging. A trigger. A release mechanism. Something built to do one thing at one specific moment, and that moment was now. I recognized it a half-second too late. The jungle erupted around us. Not with fire, not with energy discharges, not with any weapon I had ever encountered in 26 years of hunting across 60 worlds. With nets. Heavy, braided nets made from the local vine fiber, reinforced with strips of structural cabling that I recognized as material from the shelter itself. They had stripped their own home for parts. They had taken the cables that held their roof together and woven them into weapons. The nets came from above, weighted with rocks, falling through the canopy in wide arcs that covered the ground like collapsing ceilings. Garvin took the first one, full across his upper body. The net wrapped around him with the momentum of its stone weights, and the vine cable hybrid tightened on impact, the fibers constricting like living things as the weights pulled them taut. He staggered sideways and slammed into a tree trunk hard enough to shake the canopy 30 meters above us. His 4 arms tangled in a web of cord that tightened every time he pulled against it, the cable threading between his fingers and locking around his joints with a precision that suggested someone had studied how Gorvan arms move and designed the weave to exploit the range of motion. He roared, a sound that shook leaves loose and sent every flying insect in a 100-meter radius spiraling away in panic, and ripped at the netting with strength that could bend starship hull plating. I dodged the second net by throwing myself sideways, but my foot came down on something that was not solid ground. The surface beneath me collapsed, a covering of woven leaves and thin branches laid over a pit that had been dug into the jungle floor and concealed with meticulous care. Layers of vegetation placed to match the surrounding ground, dusted with the same decomposing matter that carpeted everything around it, positioned at the exact spot where someone dodging the net's trajectory would naturally land. They had calculated where I would go when I dodged, and they had put a hole in the ground at that precise location. I caught myself on the edge, my claws digging into the root-webbed soil, but something punched through my lower leg with white-hot precision. A stake, sharpened from the local ironwood, a material so dense that our orbital survey had flagged it as a mineral deposit on first scan. It went through my scales like they were cloth. Dravari scales can deflect low-caliber projectiles. This sharpened stick, cut from a tree and hardened in a fire, went through them as if they were not there. The pain was immediate and absolute. I roared and pulled myself out of the pit, the stake tearing free with a wet, grinding sound I can still hear when the nights are quiet and the memories creep back. Blood, dark and thick, poured from the wound. I scanned the clearing with my thermal vision, looking for targets, looking for the enemy, looking for anything I could aim at and destroy. The heat signatures inside the shelter had not moved. No, that was wrong. They had not moved because they were not alive. They were containers, heated containers, filled with warm fluid, arranged to mimic the thermal profiles of sleeping and moving bodies. Decoys. The humans had built thermal decoys from storage containers, and whatever chemical compounds they had on hand, adjusting the temperature of each one to match the expected output of a resting human body. The two that appeared to be moving had been placed on some kind of slow rotation mechanism, probably a wind-driven spinner built from scrap, turning them just enough to simulate the subtle heat shifts of a person walking inside a shelter. The humans were not inside the shelter. They had never been inside the shelter. Not tonight. Maybe not for days. The camp itself was the weapon. Every meter of that clearing had been engineered to funnel anyone approaching into a kill zone of pits, nets, and deadfalls built from the jungle itself. I found Selith 20 meters from the shelter entrance, hanging upside down from a vine snare that had snagged her ankle and hauled her 3 meters off the ground. Her chameleon skin was flickering wildly, cycling through colors that had nothing to do with her surroundings. A stress response that meant her nervous system was in shock. She was unconscious but alive. The snare was simple in construction. A bent sapling held under tension by a vine trigger, released when pressure was applied to a specific section of ground. Old technology, ancient technology, the kind of thing a primitive species might use to catch small animals for food. And it had caught a Yasiri infiltrator who could fool military-grade optical sensors. Vaya was gone, not dead, as far as I could determine. Her bioelectric signal was still transmitting from somewhere deeper in the jungle, but it was moving away from us at a walking pace, and it was not moving under her own power. Someone was carrying her. Korath stumbled back from the clearing, his sonar organs pressed flat against his skull in a posture I had never seen from a Feldrathi. He was shaking. He told me that something had been blown into his face the moment the nets deployed, a fine powder that coated his sonar membranes and deadened every acoustic signal within range. He had tried to clear it by rubbing, by flushing with water from his canteen, by vibrating his membranes at cleaning frequency. Nothing worked. The compound had bonded to the membrane tissue at a molecular level. His hearing was reduced to 10%. His primary sense, the one that made him the greatest tracker alive, the biological gift that his entire species built their civilization around, had been neutralized by pollen. Not a weapon, not a piece of technology. Pollen. A reproductive byproduct of a local plant, ground into a fine powder, and deployed from a concealed container at the exact moment of maximum confusion. The humans had identified the biological mechanism of Feldrathi sonar, experimented with local organic compounds until they found one that interfered with it, and deployed it as a targeted countermeasure against a specific member of my team. They had done this on an alien world, with alien biology, using materials they found in the dirt beneath their feet, in 4 months. Garvin finally tore free of the net. Vine fibers and cable fragments hung from his arms like streamers. 2 of his knuckle joints were bleeding, where the cable had cut into the gaps between his armored skin plates. He was furious, his tusked jaw grinding with a sound like stone on stone, his 4 fists clenching and unclenching with a rhythm that meant he was close to a berserker state. He rallied to my position, and we assessed the damage. 4 hunters operational, all injured. 1 hunter missing. The target had not been engaged. The target had not even been seen. 6 scientists with no military training had built a trap that neutralized a 5-member elite kill team in under 2 minutes using rope, holes in the ground, and plant dust. I contacted my ship and ordered an orbital scan of the full operational area. wide spectrum, maximum resolution. I wanted to know where every living thing larger than an insect was located within 10 kilometers of my position. The results came back in 30 seconds, and they made everything worse. 6 human heat signatures were active on the planet's surface, but they were not together. They were spread across a 3-kilometer radius around our position, moving in a pattern that the ship's tactical computer flagged as unclassified. Not fleeing, not clustering for a defensive stand, not heading for any identifiable objective. They were moving in sweeping arcs, each individual following a curved path that intersected and overlapped with the paths of the others, creating a web of movement that contracted slowly toward a central point. Korath looked at the movement data with his damaged hearing and his shaking hands, and he said one word that changed everything. Herding. The pattern was a herding formation. The humans were not running from us. They were positioned around us, moving in coordinated arcs that channeled our potential escape routes into a narrowing corridor. They were not blocking every direction. They were leaving one path open, a funnel, a channel that looked like the easiest way out, but led exactly where they wanted us to go. They were driving us, pushing us towards something. We were not the hunters on Vareth 9. We were the prey. I made the decision to abort within 60 seconds of understanding the situation. I am not proud, but I am not foolish. Pride is a luxury for hunters who have never bled, and I was bleeding freely from a leg wound that pulsed with every heartbeat. Korath was half-deaf. Seleth was unconscious. Vaya was missing. Garvin was intact, but burning through his adrenaline reserves at a rate that would leave him exhausted within an hour. One of his breathing vents was already compromised from the cable damage, and he was pulling air in short, shallow draws that meant his oxygen intake was not keeping pace with his exertion. The extraction point was 3 kilometers northeast. My ship was in a stable orbit, with the drop shuttle locked on our beacon. All we had to do was cover the distance, signal for pickup, and get off this world. Forfeit the contract, absorb the financial loss, report Dovir Len to the Guild for providing faulty intelligence, and walk away with our lives. I had never abandoned a contract. In 26 years of professional hunting, I had completed every job I accepted, collected every bounty, delivered every target alive or confirmed dead. My record was flawless, and that record was worth more than any single payment. It was the foundation of my reputation, the currency that made clients trust me and competitors avoid me. But records are written by the living, and I intended to remain among them. I cut Seleth down from the snare and revived her with a stimulant shot from my field kit. She came awake gasping, her chameleon skin still flickering, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in a Yasiri before. Yasiri are born invisible. They grow up knowing that nothing can see them, that they are ghosts among the visible species, untouchable and unseen. Their entire psychology is built on the certainty that they cannot be caught. Seleth had been caught, bound, and hung from a tree like a piece of drying meat by someone who should not have been able to perceive her at all. Her entire understanding of herself as a predator had been dismantled in under a minute. I did not have time for her crisis. I told her to move or stay. She moved. We went northeast. I took point despite my wounded leg, because my thermal vision was the only reliable detection system we had left. Korath walked behind me, his sonar organs still coated with pollen, straining to pick up anything through the chemical fog on his membranes. Every few seconds he would cock his head and listen, an expression of concentration and frustration on his narrow face, hearing the jungle as a wall of undifferentiated sound where he was used to hearing a symphony of distinct, located signals. Seleth was between us, partially visible, her camouflage failing in patches that made her look like a broken mirror. Garvin covered the rear, his forearms carrying the heavy pulse cannon like it weighed nothing, his head swiveling constantly, his damaged breathing vent making a thin, reedy whistle with each inhalation. The jungle pressed in around us. The bioluminescent fungal networks pulsed in rhythms that seemed almost deliberate, as if the planet itself was breathing in time with something we could not see. Every sound, every rustle of undergrowth, every crack of a branch, every splash of condensation falling from the canopy felt like a signal, like a notification being passed along a network of watchers that existed just beyond the edge of my perception. I was jumping at shadows, and I do not jump at shadows. I hunt in shadows. Shadows are where I live. But these shadows had things in them that I could not see, could not hear, and could not predict. We covered 500 meters without incident. The jungle thinned slightly, where a stream cut through the terrain, creating a narrow corridor of open ground, bordered by steep, muddy banks. I scanned in every direction. No heat signatures within range. No movement. No sound except the water and the ever-present hum of insect analogues. We crossed the stream. Garvin went first, his massive weight sinking into the stream bed, water rising to his lower chest. Korath and Selith followed, picking their way across the slick rocks. I crossed last, my wounded leg screaming as the cold water hit the open tissue. The stream was not deep, barely a meter, but the current was strong enough to pull at my balance, and the cold was sharp enough to cut through the heat haze of pain that had become my baseline state. On the far bank, we entered a section of old-growth jungle, where the canopy was so thick that even the bioluminescent light was muted to a faint, ghostly glow. The trees here were enormous, their trunks wider than my arm span, their roots creating a maze of elevated ridges and hidden hollows that forced us to climb over and duck under and squeeze through gaps that would have been impassable for anything larger than Garvin. The air smelled different here, older, damper, like a room that had been sealed for centuries. That is where the first human found us. There was no warning, no sound that distinguished itself from the ambient noise, no thermal signature that my infrared vision could isolate against the warm background of the jungle floor. One moment, Garvin was walking at the rear of our column, his pulse cannon sweeping left and right, his 4 eyes scanning the undergrowth with the practiced vigilance of a career soldier. The next moment, something dropped from the canopy onto his back. I spun and saw it in thermal overlay. A human. Small by our standards, maybe 80 kilograms, a fraction of Garvin's mass. The heat signature was bright and compact, burning hotter than the ambient temperature, running warmer than any cold-blooded species in my experience. The human had a length of structural cabling looped into a garrote, and the human was riding Garvin's back like a parasite, legs locked around his torso, the cable already circling one of Garvin's primary breathing vents. Garvin went berserk. He slammed backward into a tree trunk with enough force to crack the bark and send a shockwave of bioluminescent spores cascading through the canopy. He reached behind himself with all 4 arms, trying to grab the thing on his back, but the human was positioned in the one place that a Gorvan's arms cannot easily reach, the dead zone between the upper shoulder blades, where the joint geometry creates a gap in coverage. This was not luck. This was not the random scrambling of a desperate animal clinging to whatever it could grab. This was anatomical knowledge applied with surgical precision. Someone had studied Gorvan physiology, mapped the range of motion of all 4 arm joints, and identified the exact position where an attacker could maintain contact without being grabbed. The cable tightened around Garvin's breathing vent. Gorvan do not breathe through their mouths. They have lateral vents along their ribcage, armored slits that draw air directly into their respiratory chambers. If those vents are blocked, they suffocate within minutes. The human was not trying to strangle him in the conventional sense. The human was targeting his respiratory system with a weapon made from scrap cable, applying pressure to the single point where Garvin was most vulnerable. I raised my weapon and fired. A single shot, aimed past Garvin at the figure on his back. The human released the cable and dropped into the undergrowth, in a motion so fast and fluid that my shot hit nothing but bark and burning sap. 2 seconds. The human was visible for 2 seconds, and then the jungle swallowed the figure whole. No heat trail, no sound, no evidence that anyone had been there except the cable hanging from Garvin's vent and the bruises already forming on his back plates. Garvin staggered, one breathing vent partially crushed. He was alive, but his oxygen intake was compromised. His combat efficiency dropped by nearly half in that single encounter. The strongest member of my team, the one I relied on to be the immovable object at the center of any engagement, had been degraded to 50% by a creature 1/6 his mass. And then the realization hit me, and it hit hard. The human attacked Garvin, not me, the wounded one, the easiest target. Not Selith, the terrified one who was flickering in and out of visibility like a broken lamp. Not Korath, the half-deaf tracker who could barely navigate. The human attacked the strongest member of our team, the most dangerous, the most capable, the most difficult to damage. That was not desperation. That was not the random violence of a cornered animal lashing out at the nearest threat. That was strategy. Degrade the strongest asset first. Reduce the team's maximum capability before it can be deployed. Force the enemy to operate without their most powerful piece. These were not scientists defending themselves. These were predators prosecuting a campaign. We kept moving. I pushed the pace despite my leg, because staying still felt worse than bleeding. Over the next kilometer, two more things happened that reshaped my understanding of what we were facing. The first was a tripwire, thin, nearly invisible, strung across our path at precisely the height of Korath's sonar plates. Not chest height for a Gorvan, not eye height for a Dravari, sonar plate height for a Feldrathi, which is a measurement that requires knowing what a Feldrathi looks like and where on the skull the sonar plates are located. The wire was connected to a bent sapling held under tension by a vine latch, a mechanism so simple that a child could build it, and so effective that it had probably been catching prey on 1,000 worlds since before any of our species achieved spaceflight. When Korath walked through the wire, the sapling released and whipped forward, launching a cluster of rocks bundled in a net sling. The rocks hit Korath in the face. Two of his sonar plates cracked. Not shattered, not destroyed, but cracked enough that his acoustic resolution dropped to near zero. He could hear general sounds now, loud noises, voices, impacts, but the fine-grain echolocation that let him map terrain and detect heartbeats through solid material was gone. He was not blind, but he had lost the sense that mattered most, the sense that made him a tracker instead of just another hunter stumbling through the dark. The tripwire had been set at his height, not Garvin's height, not mine, his. Someone had observed our group, estimated the physical dimensions of each member, and placed the trap at the exact elevation that would strike the single most valuable sensory organ in our formation. This was not a generic obstacle. This was a targeted weapon, designed for a specific individual, based on specific intelligence, gathered through direct observation. They had been watching us. From the moment we landed, maybe before, they had watched us move through the jungle, noted our formation, identified each team member's species, and cataloged the biological advantages that each species brought to the operation. Then they built countermeasures, not with technology, not with weapons, with the materials that grew from the ground beneath their feet. The second incident was simpler but equally effective. A section of the trail, which appeared solid and had supported my weight and Korath's weight without issue, collapsed under Garvin when he stepped onto it. The surface was a lattice of woven branches covered with leaf litter, spanning a trench that had been dug across the path and filled with thick, sucking mud. Garvin dropped in up to his waist. The mud was not dangerous, not deep enough to drown in, not toxic, not acidic. But it grabbed his legs with a grip that took him 20 minutes to fight free of. His forearms braced against the edges of the trench, his massive body straining against a substance that clung to every surface and refused to release. 20 minutes during which we were stationary, exposed, and burning through the reserves of energy and morale that we could not afford to lose. I stood guard during those 20 minutes, scanning the jungle in every direction, waiting for an attack that never came. The humans did not strike while we were stopped. They did not use our vulnerability to close in and finish the job. They just let us sit there, burning time and energy, growing more exhausted and more afraid with every minute that passed. And that was when I began to understand the doctrine. None of these attacks were designed to kill us. Not the nets, not the pits, not the cable on Garvin's vent, not the rocks on Korath's sonar, not the mud trench. Every single action was calibrated to injure, to slow, to exhaust, to degrade capability, without triggering the kind of lethal engagement that would force either side into a decisive confrontation. The humans were not trying to destroy us. They were grinding us down, bleeding us one small wound at a time, stripping away our advantages piece by piece, and making every meter of forward progress cost more than the last. This was not combat. This was attrition warfare, conducted by a species that the Galactic Index classified as physically unremarkable. We pulled Garvin free and kept moving. My leg wound was stiffening, the blood clotting around the torn scales in a crust that cracked every time I flexed the joint, sending fresh jolts of pain up through my hip and into my spine. Korath was walking with his hands pressed against his cracked sonar plates, trying to hold the damaged tissue together by physical pressure alone. Seelith was invisible in patches, visible in others, a flickering ghost who flinched at every sound and jumped at every shadow. And then I saw one of them, clearly, fully, without ambiguity, for the first time. A gap in the canopy let the bioluminescent light flood a small section of the forest floor, and there she was. A human female, crouched behind a fallen log, watching us through an improvised scope assembled from salvaged optics and a hollow section of branch. She was maybe 35 standard years old, compact build, dark hair pulled back from a face that was streaked with mud and plant matter. She wore the same utility clothing as any survey team member, practical fabric, nothing armored, nothing militarized. She was bleeding from a gash on her forearm. The wound was open and untreated, the blood mixing with the mud on her skin in dark streaks that ran down to her fingertips. She did not seem to notice it, or if she noticed it, she did not care. She was smiling. That smile did something to me that no weapon has ever accomplished. I have fought creatures that exist only to kill, organisms that are born with the biological imperative to end other lives. Krailvos queens, Shentari psychics, Gorvon berserkers, Chelzari war constructs. None of them smiled while fighting. None of them showed pleasure in the act of violence. A Krailvos queen attacks because her DNA demands it. A Shentari psychic kills because his neural architecture compels it. These are machines of violence, and they operate without joy, without satisfaction, without the terrible, knowing pleasure that I saw on that human face in the blue-green light of an alien jungle. She was bleeding, and outgunned, and outnumbered, and she was smiling, because she was enjoying this. Because somewhere in the biochemistry of her species, there was a mechanism that took fear, and pain, and danger, and converted it into something that looked, from the outside, exactly like happiness. I raised my weapon. She dropped below the log, and vanished before I could fire. Gone, like smoke in wind. We found Vaya 12 minutes later. The missing Yassiri infiltrator was alive, bound to a tree with vine cordage so expertly tied that even her flexibility could not find slack. Her weapons were gone, laid out neatly on the ground beside her in a row, handles facing outward as if displayed for inspection. Her chameleon skin was locked in full visibility, a stress response so deep that her camouflage system had simply shut down. Carved into the bark beside her, in crude but legible universal script, was a single word: leave. The humans had captured an invisible assassin. They had restrained her without killing her, organized her weapons with the care of a museum curator, and carved a one-word message into a tree. They could have cut her throat. They could have used her own blades against her. They chose instead to leave her as a messenger, alive and unharmed, with a word that was equal parts warning and mercy. I cut her free. She fell against me, shaking so badly that her scales rattled against my armor. She whispered something that I had to lean close to hear, her voice thin and broken, and stripped of the confidence that Yassiri carry like a birthright. She said the human who caught her did it by listening. Not with sonar, not with any technology, not with any biological adaptation that the Galactic Index recognized as significant, with ears, human ears, which the Galactic Database rates as mediocre across every measurable frequency range. The human could not see her, could not smell her through the jungle's chemical fog, but the human tracked her by the sound of her breathing from 12 meters away in a noisy, chaotic, alien environment, filled with buzzing and dripping and rustling, and 1,000 other sounds that should have masked the faint rhythm of air entering and leaving a Yassiri's lungs. When she held her breath, the human adapted. The human threw dirt, not at her, but in a wide arc, a spray of loose soil tossed into the air to drift and settle on whatever surfaces it found. Some of it settled on her invisible skin and traced her outline against the undergrowth, a ghost suddenly given shape by a handful of dust. Then the human rushed her, bare hands against a Yassiri's skin, which secretes a camouflage compound that causes severe chemical burns on contact with most organic tissue. The human's forearms were covered in blistering welts by the time the restraints were tied. Raw, red, weeping wounds that would have sent most species recoiling in agony. The human did not slow down, did not flinch, did not pull away, did not stop until the knots were secure and the Yasiri was bound. Vaya looked at me with eyes that had seen something she could not process, something that did not fit into any framework her mind had for understanding the universe, and she said 4 words that will stay with me until I die. They do not stop. We were at roughly half our combat capability. Every member of the team was injured. Our primary tracker was functionally deaf. Both infiltrators were psychologically broken. Our heavy had compromised respiration and was operating at barely 50%. And I was limping on a leg that was slowly going numb from blood loss and beginning to show the first signs of infection from whatever bacteria inhabited this planet's soil. We were still a full kilometer from extraction. Korath pressed his damaged sonar plates against a tree trunk, using the solid wood to amplify whatever residual acoustic signal he could still detect. He closed his eyes and held very still, his entire body becoming an antenna, straining to pull meaning from the noise. After a long moment, he pulled away and looked at me. "Footsteps," he said. "Multiple sources, 3 directions, not running, walking, steady, even, unhurried walking that matched our pace exactly, maintaining a constant distance, neither closing in nor falling back." He did not need to explain what that meant. Every predator species in the galaxy has a version of this behavior, coded into their evolutionary heritage, practiced across 1,000,000 generations of hunting and killing. It is called persistence pursuit. You do not chase your prey to exhaustion in a single sprint. You follow it. You match its speed. You stay just close enough that it cannot rest, cannot recover, cannot stop to drink or eat or tend its wounds. You let its own body consume itself. You let time and distance and the slow accumulation of fatigue do the killing for you. And you are patient, endlessly patient, because you know that patience is the one resource you have more of than anything you are chasing. Humans did not just know this technique. According to their own evolutionary history, they invented it. Millions of years ago, on their home world, before they built cities or developed language or learned to split the atom, they were running animals to death across open grasslands. Not because they were faster. Every animal they chased was faster over short distances, but because they never stopped. They could run in the heat that drove other animals into the shade. They could sweat away their body heat while their prey overheated and collapsed. They could track a wounded animal across an entire continent if they had to, following it day after day, never losing the trail, never giving up, until the animal simply could not run anymore, and stood there waiting to die. And now 6 of them were doing it to us, in a jungle, in the dark, on a world 1,000,000 light-years from the plains where they first learned to be the most patient killers in creation. I looked at my team, broken and bleeding and terrified, and I made the worst decision of my career. I had never split a team during a retreat. It goes against every principle of tactical movement, against every lesson I learned in my first decade of contract hunting. You stay together. You maintain unit cohesion. You cover each other's weaknesses with each other's strengths. Splitting a team is what prey does when the predator gets too close, scattering in different directions and hoping that at least some individuals survive through simple mathematics, through the probability that a predator can only chase one at a time. But we were prey now, and I had to think like prey if I wanted any of us to survive. I told Garvin to take Vaya and move east, following the stream we had crossed earlier. The water would mask their thermal signatures and their footsteps. Garvin's mass made him impossible to miss on thermal, but the stream's temperature differential might buy enough confusion to break the tracking pattern. I would take Korath and Selith west, through a ravine that the orbital survey had mapped as a narrow cut in the terrain, rocky and difficult but direct. If the humans could not follow both groups simultaneously, at least half of us would reach the ship. Garvin stared at me with his deep-set eyes, all 4 hands gripping his weapon, his damaged breathing vent whistling faintly with each labored inhalation. He did not argue. He had been a mercenary longer than anyone on this team except me, and he recognized the calculus of a lost engagement. Sometimes you pay with pride to keep your life. He took Vaya by the arm, gently, with one of his upper hands, and moved toward the stream without a word. Korath, Selith, and I turned west. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. The jungle continued its alien symphony of buzzing and pulsing and dripping. The bioluminescent fungal networks shifted through their color cycles with the slow, patient rhythm of an organism that measured time in decades rather than seconds. The air was so thick with humidity and chemical compounds that every breath felt like drinking, and every exhalation left a faint mist that hung in front of my face before the jungle absorbed it. No traps, no shadows, no footsteps, just the three of us, limping through the dark, bleeding and scared, and hoping that the forest had run out of surprises. I almost let myself believe it was over. Almost. Then Garvin's communication channel exploded with noise. I heard everything through my earpiece, sharp and immediate and terrible. Garvin shouting, not battle commands, not tactical calls, but raw, uncontrolled sound. The sound of surprise so complete that it bypassed training and discipline and went straight to the animal core of his brain. He was screaming that they came from underground, that there was a tunnel, that the humans had dug a tunnel beneath the stream bed and come up behind them. A tunnel, dug through wet soil and river rock by hand, shored up with branches, sealed with a layer of packed mud and stones, positioned at the exact point where the stream's current noise would cover any sound of movement from inside. They had not just dug a hole, they had engineered an ambush point that exploited the environmental noise of the stream itself as acoustic cover. They had dug it before we arrived, before they knew our team composition, before they knew which direction we would retreat. They had anticipated that someone might use the stream as an escape route and built a weapon underneath it. Vaya's signal spiked once, a sharp burst of bioelectric activity consistent with sudden, overwhelming force applied to the nervous system, and went silent. Not dead. The biosins were still transmitting. Neural activity pattern consistent with induced unconsciousness. Neutralized in the opening seconds of the engagement, before she could even react. Garvin's feed devolved into a chaotic mess of impact sounds and grunting, and the crash of a massive body hitting the ground. I heard human voices, short and clipped, issuing commands in their own language, too fast for my translator to parse in real time. Coordination, teamwork, practiced movements executed with the timing of people who had drilled for this moment. Then something hit Garvin's communication array, a crunch of breaking equipment, and his channel went to static. I checked biosins. Garvin was alive, heart rate elevated but dropping toward a resting state. Neural activity consistent with deep unconsciousness. He had been knocked out. A four-armed, 500-kilogram combat heavy, with reinforced bone density and pain tolerance that bordered on biological malfunction, had been rendered unconscious by creatures that weighed less than one of his arms. Without firearms, without energy weapons, without anything that the Galactic Arms Index would classify as a weapon at all. In under 90 seconds. Korath looked at me. Selith looked at me. I had nothing to tell them. No tactical insight. No reassurance. No plan except to keep moving, and hope that motion itself was enough to carry us out of this nightmare. We moved. Faster now. Abandoning caution for speed. Crashing through the undergrowth with all the subtlety of a cargo shuttle in a debris field. The ravine was ahead, a dark slash in the terrain where the rock broke apart into a narrow channel, barely wide enough for Garvin to pass through sideways. I could see the sky through the gap in the canopy, could see stars I did not recognize, cold and indifferent, above a world that had become a hunting ground with us as the game. A voice came out of the darkness. It spoke in universal common, accented, but grammatically correct, with the calm and measured cadence of someone who is not in a hurry and not afraid. A male voice, human, coming from somewhere in the canopy above us and slightly ahead. Not shouting, not straining. Just talking, the way you might talk to someone across a dinner table. The voice said that our ship was still at the extraction point, untouched. The humans had not sabotaged it, had not disabled it, had not even approached it. We could leave, drop our weapons and walk. No one else needed to get hurt. I stood in the dark jungle with my wounded leg and my half-deaf tracker and my broken infiltrator, and I listened to a member of a Tier 4 species offer terms of surrender to the most feared mercenary in the Orion Perseus arm. They were not begging. They were not bargaining from weakness. They were not negotiating because they had to. They were offering mercy from a position of absolute tactical dominance. They had dismantled my team piece by piece over the course of 3 hours, neutralized every biological advantage we possessed, captured or incapacitated 3 of my 5 hunters, and driven the remaining 3 into a corridor of their choosing. They had won this engagement before we even stepped off the shuttle. Everything since the nets fell had been a controlled demonstration of how completely and how thoroughly they had won. And now they were letting us go. Not because they could not finish it, because they chose not to. Korath dropped his weapon before the voice finished speaking. The long-barreled sonar rifle hit the soft ground with a thud that sounded like surrender and relief and shame all at once. He looked at me with his damaged sonar plates and his exhausted body, and he said that he was done, that he had no pride left to protect, that staying alive to hunt another day was a better outcome than dying in the mud for a client who lied about the target. Then he walked toward the extraction point with his hands visible at his sides, moving slowly, making no sudden movements. No trap sprang, no net fell, no human appeared to stop him. They let him go. They actually let him go. Seelith wanted to follow. I could see it in the way her flickering camouflage had stabilized into full visibility, her body's final surrender of the instinct that defined her species. She looked at me with the silent question in her eyes. I could not accept it. I could not stand in that jungle and take mercy from a species that I was supposed to be able to crush. I was Vrothek Sonkai. I had never failed. I had never yielded. I had never been beaten, not by queens or psychics or war priests, or any of the 100 horrors I had faced across a career built on being the thing that other predators feared. I grabbed Selith's arm and pulled her forward. We would reach the ship, rearm with the heavy weapons in the corvette's armory, and come back. Not for the contract, for my pride, for the record that defined me, for the identity I had built across 26 years of being the most dangerous thing in any room I entered. We made it to within 200 meters of the ship. I could see the shuttle through the trees, its running lights pulsing softly in the darkness, the ramp down, the interior lit and waiting. 200 meters, less than a minute at full sprint. The human was standing in the open, directly in my path, not hidden, not crouched behind cover, not armed with any weapon I could see, just standing there, feet planted on the jungle floor, arms at her sides, looking at me with an expression that carried no fear and no aggression and no uncertainty. It was the woman from before, the one behind the fallen log, the one who was smiling. She was still bleeding from the same wound on her forearm, the one she had not treated. The blood had dried in dark streaks down her hand, mixing with the mud and the chemical residue of the jungle. She had dark circles under her eyes, the kind that come from sustained sleep deprivation, deep and bruised and permanent looking. Her hair was matted with dirt and plant matter, and her clothes were torn in 3 places. She looked like she had been awake for 30 hours at minimum, fighting and building and running and planning without stopping to rest or eat or close her eyes. She stood in front of an 8-foot venomous alien mercenary, the way someone stands in a doorway, waiting for a late bus. No tension in her posture, no fear in her eyes, no weapon in her hands. She said 2 words, "You were warned." I released Selith's arm and charged. Full speed, venom spines extended, every fiber of muscle in my body engaged in a burst of violence that I had never needed to use at full power, because nothing had ever required it. I am faster than I look. 8 feet of scaled mass moving at a dead sprint covers ground with terrifying speed, and my venom spines are coated in a neurotoxin that can stop a Gorvan heart in 30 seconds. I should have hit her before she could blink. I should have ended this in 1 strike. She sidestepped. Not with superhuman reflexes. Not with alien speed or genetic enhancement or any of the dozen explanations I tried to construct afterward to make it make sense. She sidestepped with timing. She had been watching my body, reading the microtensions in my legs, the shift in my center of gravity, the angle of my leading shoulder, the direction my spines were tracking, and she had calculated the vector of my attack before I was fully committed. She moved early, moved clean, and moved exactly far enough that my spines passed through the air where she had been standing a half-second before. Then she did the thing that gave me this scar. She stepped into my reach, not away from me, into. Inside the arc of my spines, inside the range where my arms could grab her, inside the space that every instinct in her body should have told her was death. She closed the distance to zero, pressing herself against my chest like a lover, and drove something into the gap between my plates. I felt it hit the ventral seam, the one gap in Dravari anatomy where the scaled plates do not fully overlap. A strip of exposed tissue 3 centimeters wide, running from the sternum to the lower rib line, covered by a thin membrane that protects the internal organs, but offers almost no resistance to a sharp edge. Every species has a design flaw, a weakness in the biological architecture that evolution never got around to fixing. Ours is that seam. It is not in any public database. It is not listed in any xenobiology textbook available to civilian researchers. I know because I checked, afterward, when I was trying to understand how she found it. But this human had found it. In 4 months on a jungle world with no access to Dravari medical literature, no xenobiology training, no advanced scanning equipment. She had identified the single most vulnerable point on my body, through observation, through experimentation, through the relentless, methodical, terrifying human capacity to look at something they do not understand, and take it apart until they do. The weapon was a piece of hull scrap, metal from the shelter itself, sharpened on the local ironwood until the edge could part cells. She had made a blade from garbage, and she had put it exactly where it needed to go. She twisted once. The pain was beyond anything in my experience, beyond the language I have to describe it, beyond the framework my nervous system had for processing damage. Every nerve in my torso fired at once, a white-hot cascade of signals that overwhelmed my brain and sent my vision spiraling into static. She pulled the blade free, stepped back, and watched me fall. I hit the ground face first. My vision was tunneling, the infrared overlay collapsing, the colors draining from the bioluminescent world around me. Blood, my blood, black and thick, was pooling beneath me. The last thing I saw before consciousness left me was the woman kneeling beside me. She had dropped the blade. Her hands, small and blunt-fingered, and covered in my blood, were pressing against my wound. Not attacking, not finishing what she started. She was applying pressure to the seam, her palms flat against the torn tissue, holding the wound closed with a technique that suggested she knew exactly how much pressure was needed, exactly where to apply it, exactly how to keep a Dravari from bleeding out through his one weak point. She had nearly killed me, and now she was saving my life. I passed out with a human's hands on my chest, and the last coherent thought I had was that I had been wrong about everything. I woke up on my own ship. The lights were on, dim and warm, set to the default resting spectrum that the ship's systems activate when no one is at the controls. I was lying on the medical bay cot, and the pain in my chest was a dull, throbbing pressure held in check by a field dressing that I did not apply. I looked down and saw the wound, stitched closed with thread that was not from my medical kit. Plant fiber. Fine. Even stitches, placed with a precision that would have earned respect from a surgical drone. Whoever did this had steady hands and a working knowledge of Dravari tissue density, because the stitches were spaced to account for the tension that scaled skin places on suture material. Too close together, and the scales would pull them out. Too far apart, and the wound would gape. These were perfect. A human had sewn me shut with thread made from jungle vines, and the work was better than half the field medics I had employed over 26 years of getting hurt for money. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body protesting the movement, and looked around the medical bay. Garvin was on the floor, too large for any cot on the ship, his 4 arms folded across his chest, unconscious but breathing steadily through his undamaged vents. His damaged breathing vent had been cleaned and packed with a poultice that smelled like the local flora, something green and astringent, that seemed to be reducing the swelling around the crushed tissue. Someone had examined his anatomy, identified the injury, found a local plant with anti-inflammatory properties, and prepared a treatment. On an alien, for an alien species they had never encountered before tonight. Vaya was curled in the corner, asleep, her weapons laid beside her in the same neat row I had seen at the tree. Seelith was sitting against the wall with her knees drawn to her chest, her camouflage fully stable for the first time in hours, her eyes open and staring at nothing. Korath was in the cockpit, sitting in the pilot's seat, staring at the console with the expression of someone who has been awake for too long and seen too much, and does not know how to begin processing any of it. Everyone was alive, everyone was aboard. Every member of my team had been carried, dragged, or guided back to the ship by the people we had come to kill. The humans had carried Garvin. 500 kilograms of unconscious Gorvon, transported through a kilometer of dense jungle terrain, and loaded onto a ship. 6 humans, none of them larger than half his size, had moved him by hand. I tried to calculate the physical effort required, and stopped, because the number did not fit any model of human capability that the galactic databases contained. The databases said they should not have been able to do it. The databases were wrong. They had treated every injury. Korath's sonar plates had been flushed with a solvent that dissolved the pollen compound, and while the cracks would need proper medical attention, the chemical interference was gone. His sonar was coming back online, slowly, painfully, like a limb that had fallen asleep and was now prickling with returning sensation. Vaya's stress injuries had been addressed with improvised compresses made from local plant fiber, soaked in something cool and medicinal. Sileth had no physical injuries, but someone had left a container of water and a nutrient bar beside her, positioned exactly where she would see them when she woke up. A small gesture, a careful one. The kind of thing you do when you understand that psychological wounds need tending too. On the console in the cockpit, Korath found a data chip. Small, standard format. The kind you could buy at any station for a fraction of a credit. He played it without asking me, and I did not stop him. The male voice again. The one from the jungle. Calm, measured, unhurried. Speaking with the quiet certainty of someone who has demonstrated every claim they are about to make, he said that we were not their enemy, that we had never been their enemy. He asked us to tell whoever hired us that Vareth 9 was under their protection, and that the next team sent against them would not be carried back to their ship. That was it. No threats, no demands. No list of conditions or terms of continuing mercy. A statement of fact, delivered with the absolute confidence of people who had already proven their ability to enforce it. They did not need to threaten. The evidence was lying in my medical bay, stitched together with plant fiber and packed with jungle poultice. 5 elite hunters who had been taken apart and put back together like broken toys. I sat in my own ship, on my own cot, wearing stitches made by enemy hands, and I understood something that changed the trajectory of my life. The Galactic Classification Index is wrong about humans. Not slightly wrong, not missing a few data points. Fundamentally, structurally, catastrophically wrong. Wrong in a way that would get people killed for as long as the error persisted. Wrong in a way that I had a responsibility to correct, because I was alive to correct it, and the next hunter who relied on that index might not be. I returned to Korvan Station and broke my contract with Dovir Len for the first and only time in my career. Len was furious. He threatened guild sanctions, financial penalties, blacklisting from every major contract board in the sector. He threatened to destroy my reputation, my career, everything I had built over 26 years of flawless work. He sat behind his desk in his expensive office on a station he owned shares in and told me that I was finished. I broke 3 of his limbs and told him to send his own people if he wanted those humans so badly. He did. He was Chelzari, and the Chelzari do not accept defiance gracefully. He assembled a military detachment, 40 soldiers, fully equipped with Chelzari combat armor, light armored vehicles, air support drones, and orbital strike authorization. A proper military force, not a 5-hunter kill team operating on stealth and speed. 40 trained soldiers with weapons designed to level fortified positions, backed by technology that outclassed anything on that jungle world by several centuries. The detachment's ship was found drifting at the edge of the Varath system 6 days later. Engines cold, life support running on standby, crew compartments empty. Not a single body aboard, not a single drop of blood, not a single scorch mark or weapons discharge residue, or any evidence that violence had occurred at all. The crew's weapons were stacked in the cargo bay, organized by type and serial number, arranged with the same meticulous care that I had seen with Vaya's blades at the base of that tree. And the navigation computer had a single course locked in, destination set for Chelzari homeworld. 40 soldiers against 6 scientists. And the soldiers were so thoroughly defeated that the jungle did not even bother to keep them. I stopped speaking and let the silence settle over the table. The 4 young hunters were staring at me with expressions I recognized, the particular look of people who have just learned that the universe contains something they were not prepared for, something that does not fit into the categories they built for understanding danger, something that rewrites the rules they thought they knew. The Velthari kid, Dren, had gone pale under his scales. The Gorvathi heavy who called me a coward was gripping the edge of the table with all 4 hands, squeezing hard enough to leave dents in the metal surface. One of them asked me why. Why are humans like this? What is different about them? What makes a Tier 4 species capable of things that Tier 1 species cannot match? I ordered a final drink and I told them, it is not strength. A dozen species are stronger than humans. Gorvan can tear apart vehicle hulls. Chelzari war constructs can bench press their own weight 10 times over. Even a mid-range Feldrathi has more raw muscular power per kilogram than a human at peak condition. It is not speed. Humans are among the slower sapient species over short distances. A Yasiri can cross a room before a human can turn their head. It is not technology, not intelligence, not sensory capability. By every measurable metric, humans are average, unremarkable. The kind of species you overlook in a database because nothing about their biological profile stands out. What makes them different is 3 things that no galactic index has ever attempted to measure. 3 qualities that do not fit into any existing classification framework. 3 attributes that make them the most dangerous species I have ever encountered, and I have encountered 61. The first is adaptability. In 12 hours on an alien world, 6 scientists with no military training built a defensive network that defeated 5 elite hunters. They did not bring weapons designed for this purpose. They did not have defensive technology or fortification equipment. They used the planet itself, the trees, the vines, the mud, the pollen, the ironwood, the bioluminescent fungi, every resource the jungle offered. They studied our team from concealment, identified the biological advantages of every species represented, and constructed specific, targeted countermeasures from materials they found in the dirt. Pollen for the sonar hunter, weighted nets designed to exploit Gorvan arm geometry, dust thrown in the dark to outline an invisible assassin, a sharpened piece of scrap metal aimed at the one seam in Dravari armor that no public database records. They rewrote the rules of the engagement using sticks, rocks, and vines, and they won. The second is endurance. The woman who drove that blade into my chest had been awake for over 30 hours when she did it. She was bleeding from an untreated wound that had been open for at least 6 of those hours. She was operating in a toxic biosphere that her species was not evolved for, breathing air that was slowly depositing harmful compounds in her lung tissue, walking on ground that fought her every step with roots and mud and unstable terrain. She did not slow down, she did not collapse, she did not fold under the accumulated weight of exhaustion and injury and fear, and the knowledge that she was facing a creature 3 times her size, with venom that could stop her heart in seconds. She got sharper, more focused, more precise, because somewhere in the biochemistry of her species, somewhere in the millions of years of evolutionary pressure that shaped them on their brutal homeworld, there is a mechanism that takes damage and fatigue and mortal danger and converts them into fuel. The worse things get, the more dangerous humans become. They have a word for it. I have heard it spoken in a dozen languages across 100 worlds, and it is always said with the same mixture of awe and disbelief. Adrenaline, a chemical, a hormone, a substance produced by 2 small glands sitting on top of their kidneys, released into the bloodstream in response to stress, flooding the body with a cocktail that increases heart rate, sharpens vision, dulls pain, accelerates reaction time, and suppresses the rational fear response that keeps most species alive by telling them when to stop fighting and start running. Humans do not run. When their bodies produce adrenaline, they stop being afraid and start being lethal. The third thing is the one that truly keeps me awake at night. The one that separates humans from every other dangerous species I have ever encountered. The one that makes them not just deadly, but terrifying. In a way that transcends biology and enters the realm of something I do not have a word for in my language. Mercy as dominance. The humans on Varath 9 could have killed every member of my team. They had the capability, the opportunity, and by any reasonable standard, the justification. We came to their world to capture or kill them. We attacked their home. We brought 5 elite killers to a camp of 6 civilians and initiated a hostile operation without warning or negotiation. By every code of conduct in the Galactic Mercenary Compact, they had the right to respond with lethal force and face no consequences. And they let us live. Not because they were weak, not because they lacked the stomach for killing, not because they were bound by some abstract moral code that prevented them from doing harm even in self-defense. They let us live because they understood something that no Tier 1 species in the Galactic Index has ever grasped. That leaving enemies alive and humiliated is a more effective strategy than leaving corpses. A dead hunter is a line in a database, a number, a statistic that gets filed under mission losses and forgotten after the next contract cycle. Nobody tells stories about dead hunters, because dead hunters do not have endings. They just stop. But a living hunter who walks into a guild hall and shows a scar and tells this story, who sits down at a table full of young killers and makes them put their bounty dossier away, who carries the memory of that jungle in his nightmares, and his waking hours, and the ache under his armor every time the weather changes. That living hunter is a weapon that keeps firing long after the battle is over. I am not a survivor of Varath 9. I am a broadcast, a signal, a repeating transmission that the humans launched 12 years ago and that has been propagating through the mercenary networks of the Orion Perseus arm ever since, getting louder with every retelling, reaching further with every guild hall and every station bar, and every quiet conversation between hunters who know better. Every time someone hears this story, every time a young crew looks at a human contract and hesitates, every time a senior hunter shakes his head and walks away from a payout that could buy a fleet, the human's message travels another light year. Do not come to our worlds. Do not hunt our people. We will defeat you, and we will send you home to tell everyone what happened. They weaponized our survival instinct against us. They understood the psychology of the mercenary world better than the mercenaries did, and they used it with a sophistication that I still find difficult to reconcile with a species that was hunting with sharpened sticks 10,000 years ago. They knew that fear is more valuable than death. They knew that a story told in a guild hall would protect them more effectively than 1,000 kills. They knew that mercy, applied strategically, applied to the right people at the right time, with the right message carved into a tree, is the most devastating weapon in the galaxy. That is why the contract boards stopped listing human bounties 3 years after Varath 9, not because of any law, not because of any treaty or trade agreement or diplomatic intervention, because every hunter who took a human contract came back with the same story, or did not come back at all. And eventually, the guild decided that the species was not worth the cost. The payout on human contracts tripled, then quintupled, then climbed to numbers that were functionally infinite, and still nobody took them. Because no amount of money buys back what you lose when you go after a human, and they decide to teach you what they are. The young hunters were silent. The guild hall around us had gone quiet too, the ambient noise of mercs drinking and arguing fading as the story's gravity pulled in listeners from surrounding tables. Dren was looking at the bounty dossier that he had pulled from the table earlier. He stared at it for a long moment, then reached into his belt pouch and set it back on the table, face down. He did not look at it again. Another member of his crew, the quiet one who had not spoken all evening, pushed back from the table and walked out of the guild hall without a word. The Gorvathi Heavy was still gripping the table. Her 4 hands were trembling. I told them one more thing, because I wanted them to understand the scope of what I was describing. In the 12 years since Varath 9, I have watched the human expansion across this galaxy. I have tracked their movements, studied their conflicts, observed the patterns. Every war they enter follows the same arc, a curve so consistent that I could plot it on a graph and predict the outcome before the first shot is fired. They lose early, they absorb damage, they take hits that would break other species. Losses that would shatter morale and fracture command structures, and send entire civilizations into retreat. And they do not break. They bend, they stagger, they bleed, and they grieve, and they count their dead, but they do not break. And then, slowly, relentlessly, with a grinding, creative, stubborn, infuriating refusal to accept that defeat is a permanent condition, they adapt, they learn, they study whatever hurt them, and they find its weaknesses, and they build countermeasures from whatever is lying on the ground. And they come back, always, without exception. They come back, and they are smarter than they were before, and they are angrier than they were before, and they do not make the same mistake twice. The galactic classification indexes rate them Tier 4 because the indexes measure biology, muscle density, sensory range, dermal resistance, venom potency, regenerative capacity, and by those metrics, humans are middling, average, a species lost in the vast middle of the bell curve, indistinguishable from 100 other bipedal, endoskeletal, carbon-based organisms that populate the unremarkable center of the galactic census. But if the indexes measured will, if they had a scale for the thing that lives behind a human's eyes when you have taken everything from them and they are still standing, if they could quantify the force that keeps a bleeding woman on her feet at 30 hours without sleep, facing a creature that could kill her with a touch, armed with nothing but a piece of sharpened metal and the absolute, unshakable certainty that she will not lose. If the galactic classification system could measure that, then humans would be the only Tier 1 species in existence. And every other species in the galaxy, including mine, would be somewhere far, far below. The guild hall doors opened. Warm light from the corridor spilled across the floor, cutting through the dim interior and drawing every eye in the room. Someone walked in, and every conversation that was still happening dropped by half a decibel. It was a human, not a soldier, not a special operative, not one of the legendary Varath 9 survivors. A freight pilot. Average build, average height. Wearing the standard utility jumpsuit of a long-haul cargo runner, the kind with company patches on the shoulders and grease stains on the knees. The human walked to the bar, ordered something from the automated dispenser, and sat down on a stool with the relaxed, casual body language of someone who has absolutely no reason to be afraid of anything in the room. The human pulled out a small personal device and began scrolling through what looked like cargo manifests, occasionally sipping the drink, occasionally glancing up at the screens showing freight schedules and trade route updates. I watched the guild hall's reaction. 40 mercenaries, representing 17 species, including apex predators and former military specialists, and hunters with kill counts in the triple digits, all watching a single unarmed freight pilot with the focused, cautious attention that prey animals reserve for predators who have not yet decided whether to hunt. No one approached the human, no one sat too close, no one made eye contact for longer than a passing glance. Two hunters, who had been sitting at the bar, moved to a table without finishing their drinks, creating a buffer of empty stools on either side of the pilot. The most dangerous killers in the sector were giving a cargo pilot the same wide berth they would give a Kralvos queen in a spawning rage. Not because the pilot had done anything threatening, not because the pilot was armed or aggressive or displaying any behavior that would normally trigger a threat response, but because the pilot was human, and every hunter in that room had heard a story like mine, or knew someone who had lived one, or had simply absorbed through the osmotic wisdom of the mercenary profession that some species are not to be provoked regardless of how harmless they appear. The pilot noticed me looking and gave me a nod, simple, friendly, the kind of casual acknowledgement you give a stranger in a bar, a gesture that carries no weight and no agenda and no awareness whatsoever of the fact that the stranger you are nodding to once brought 5 professional killers to a human camp and got dismantled so thoroughly that he keeps the scar as a monument. I nodded back. My chest ached. The scar pulled at the synthetic mesh beneath my armor, and for a moment, I was not on Korvan Station anymore. I was back on Varath 9, bleeding on the jungle floor, watching a woman kneel beside me with my blood on her hands, and the steady, certain knowledge in her eyes that she could have let me die but chose not to, because letting me live served a purpose that was bigger than one fight on one world, on one night. I turned to the young hunters and delivered the last thing I had to say. That pilot flies cargo, alone, through the Vendrus corridor, through the Ashfall Straits, through pirate zones that make seasoned war captains reroute their entire fleets to avoid. Nobody touches that ship. No pirate, no raider, no desperate outlaw with a death wish and a need for quick credits. That ship flies untouched through the most dangerous space in the sector, and every predator in those corridors watches it pass the way you would watch a storm system rolling across a plain. You do not challenge a storm, you let it pass. And you know why? Because somewhere in this galaxy, there are 5 hunters and 40 soldiers who can tell you exactly what happens when you try. I finished my drink, stood up from the table, and walked toward the door. My leg ached with every step, a phantom memory of the ironwood stake that went through it 12 years ago, and my chest pulled with the old familiar tension of the scar tissue that I will carry until the day I die. I passed the human at the bar. The pilot looked up from the cargo manifests and smiled at me. An easy, open, unafraid smile. Warm and meaningless, and automatic. The kind of expression that humans deploy without thinking, because friendliness is their default setting, because they walk through a galaxy full of species that fear them, and they genuinely do not understand why. That is the most terrifying thing about them. They do not know what they are. They look in the mirror and see a fragile, soft-skinned, short-lived creature with no claws and no venom and no armor. And they think they are ordinary. They think they are unremarkable. They walk into rooms full of predators and nod and smile because it does not occur to them that the predators are afraid. And maybe that is why the predators are afraid. Because a species that does not know it is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, is a species that has never found a reason to limit itself. A species that has never looked at a challenge and thought, this is beyond me. A species that digs tunnels under rivers and sharpens scrap metal and stands in the path of monsters and smiles, because the concept of surrender does not exist in whatever part of their brain controls the will to fight. I kept walking. The guild hall door closed behind me, shutting out the light and the noise and the quiet, unassuming presence of a freight pilot who would never know that every killer in the room had been watching. Behind me, the bounty dossier sat face down on the table where Dren had left it, alone in a ring of empty glasses and abandoned conversations. Not a single hunter in the room reached for it,